Hello everyone, it is the 13th lecture for the introduction to the New Testament, and this is the second lecture about the parables of Jesus, and we'll discuss about the sowing of the seeds. And so Jesus, he spoke of many different things through all of the parables that he had given. He gave easy examples of life through the parables and had explained to us the secret world of heaven. And we've also explained about this. And so for one of the first parables about the sowing of the seeds, he talked about the 4 types of different fields. So the Word of God is represented through the seed. And so the ground on this earth, appropriately and accurately describes the world of our heart. And so Jesus teaches us appropriately how the fields reflect the world of the heart of those who are living today. And so we will speak about the 4 different kinds of fields. First, there was a field by the roadside. The second field is the stony field. The third field is the field with thorns. And the fourth field talks about the good ground. And so the Word of God is alive, and it has energy to move. And so if the Word of God meets the hearts of the people, because there is life inside of the Word of God, and through the human life that connects to this Word, then God is able to perform amazing works. However, although there might be the works of life within the Word of God, depending on the heart of the people who accept that Word, it can either bear fruit or it will not bear fruit. And there's this issue as well. First of all, the seed was spread onto the field next to the roadside. There wasn't a path there at first, but because many people had traveled along there, it became a path, and as the path was formed, the texture of that earth had become very, very hard. So let us write down the 4 different kinds of fields we were talking about. The first field is the field by the roadside. So this roadside field, because there were so many footprints on this land, even though they spread out the seed, this seed, the birds immediately come and eat the seed. And this is what Jesus is trying to reveal to us. So these birds in the Bible represent Satan, and this is the meaning that it portrays here. So as we think about a bird, this also comes out in other parts of the Bible. If you look in the Old Testament, if you look at Genesis chapter 40, in Genesis chapter 40 is the story of the chief baker and the chief butler. And so the chief baker of the king, he had a basket of white bread. And so he had this white bread, but on top of this, he had placed all manner of baked meats. And so as he put these baked meats on top of the white bread, it also says the birds came and ate the baked meats. And there is this kind of story also. So in Genesis chapter 40, we are also looking into what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 13. And the fact that he says that as the seed was spread along the roadside, the birds came and ate them. Although today we are hearing the Word of God, when you look at the Word of God, through the thoughts of man, through modern man's experiences, and through all the other things of man, when you look at the Word of God, it does not match the Word of God in any way. And the last time among the things that we learned, in John chapter 6, when a multitude of 5,000 people were starving in the field, His disciples came to him and said, "Master, there is nothing for these people to eat, and the day is passing. It would be good if they could eat something, but we must send them to the village so they can buy something to eat." This is the best idea. And when they said this, Jesus said, "You don't have to send them anywhere. You give them something to eat." Jesus, He had the power to feed them. However, but they did not remember the power of Jesus, nor did they think about the power of Jesus. This Jesus changed water into wine at the wedding feast of Cana, right before He fed the multitude in chapter 6. In chapter 5, He healed a man with infirmity for 38 years. Inside of Jesus was the power, and inside of this word is the life and power because of this. Therefore, if we are together with this person who has this power, even though it is a barren place or an empty field, even though Jesus had the power to take care of this problem, but in the heart of Philip, relying upon his humanistic calculations, he said, "Jesus, even if we divide the people a little bit of bread, we would need at least 200 denarii worth of bread." So the condition of Philip's heart, so what this is explaining is, he is the ground near the roadside. So in other words, even though he hears the words of Jesus, but those words in the heart of Philip, although those words contain the power of Jesus, but there is no such words that exist in the heart of Philip. He said, "You give them something to eat." Then he should throw away his humanistic thoughts, and he must accept the words as they are, but according to his humanistic calculation, and according to his experience, according to his humanistic methods and the methods of the world. And because these things are stored inside of his heart, he cannot accept the words that Jesus is saying. But on the other hand, everyone, although we know the story of Andrew, the world of Andrew's heart was completely different. So when we talk about the other fields in the parable, we look at Andrew. If we are to compare the world of his heart with a field, then Andrew's heart is like the good land. And that is why when Andrew brings the young boy's lunchbox of 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish before Jesus, Jesus blesses the food, and he feeds 5,000 people, and he collects 12 baskets full of leftovers. And right now we are talking about the world of the heart. And so this field by the roadside, because there were so many human footprints that trampled on this land, which represents human experiences and the morals of this world, and the humanistic philosophy, and humanistic thoughts, and the thoughts of the flesh. And because he is depending upon these things, and when these things fill our hearts, and when the words of Jesus fall into our hearts, Satan comes, and these words that have fallen in our hearts, because he removes them, and that is why there can be no works of life on the field that is by the roadside. The second field, which is explained in Matthew chapter 13, is the stony field. Jesus talks about the stony field by saying, "Some fell upon stony places where they had not much earth, and forthwith they sprung up because they had no deepness of earth. And when the sun was up, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away." And when Jesus explained about this again, he said, "But he that receiveth the seed into stony places, the same is he that heareth the word, and anon with joy receiveth it. Yet hath he not root in himself, but dureth for a while. For when tribulation or persecution ariseth because of the word, and by and by he is offended." So it says here, because of the word, when tribulation or persecution ariseth, when these arise, he falls over. Although there are many people who are living spiritual life today, in order to live their spiritual life, they separate from their families, and they have troubles, and they say, after all, Jesus said when he came to this world, he came here to bring a sword. And therefore, if we believe in Jesus, conflicts will arise between our parents, our children, between husbands and wives. And therefore, there are much conflict that arises in their hearts. And then the members within a family become enemies. Yes, this is true. And when we actually start to live spiritual life, because it is Satan, the god of this world and prince of the power of the air, is strongly holding on to their hearts. Therefore, if one person starts to believe within a family, then they are persecuted. And if it's a worst case scenario, then within the family they go through tribulations and trials, and they experience difficulties at the job. And in the past, the main reasons why many conflicts arose in the church was due to all of this. Although they believe in Jesus, and although believing in Jesus is good, although they are believing in Jesus with joy, but whenever persecutions and tribulations arise because of the word, in the heart fear enters and worry enters, and in the end result, it speaks here about a person who eventually falls down because of this. So in the heart, the stone, it represents problems that arise in our hearts. So it acts as a stone that enters our heart, and it keeps the word that we receive from working with power and giving us joy. In the Bible, if we were to talk about the stony field, for example, if you look at the book of Esther, which is in the Old Testament, there was a man named Haman who eventually came to have much power, and he had convinced King Ahasuerus to enforce a law that says on December 13th, we are to kill all of the Jews and to take away all their possessions. And when he received the stamp of King Ahasuerus and made it into a law, the Jewish people went through much pain, much suffering, and weeping. Mordecai, who was Esther's older cousin, told Esther, who became, "You must go before the king. Isn't it for this purpose that you have been made queen?" And although he had strongly told her to go before the king, but even at that time, Esther's heart was like the stony field. Since she was a Jew, and to admit that she was a Jew in order to save their lives, and when she heard those words to go before the king, and then what came to her heart was, the tribulations and the difficulties. And because of the law of the king, and she was tied down to that law, and you can see that she was really oppressed by that law. And therefore, she said, if I go before the king and he has not called me, then I can only die before the king. It has been 30 days since the king has summoned me. If the king has not called me, how can I go before him? If he calls me, then I will go out to him. And so Esther's older cousin Mordecai heard those words. When she heard the words of her cousin Mordecai, to accept those words, it was so burdensome, and it became difficulty inside of her heart, right? And we can say that the state of Esther's heart was an example of the stony field. Although I'll touch on this more a little later, but Mordecai, and so inside of Esther's heart, which is like that stony field, and those stones which are oppressing Esther's heart, he is removing those stones, and that is the work that he is doing. So the stony field represents the heart that is trapped by tribulation and the circumstance. And so Mordecai wanted to put faith inside of her heart, and he led her according to the word. And he was like the person who was tilling the field, and he removed the stones in order to make her heart the good field. And when he made the good field, and then this Esther, she believed in the word, and exactly as she was told, she went before the king, and as she overcame these tribulations and persecutions, and we could see that the amazing works of God, of her heart changing from a stony field to the good field, and it is talking about how that heart had changed. And the third thing that we are going to look at now, and so the third field of this parable that Jesus is speaking, and some fell among thorns. And this is what it says. This is a thorny field. A thorny field, it is a field with many thorns. And once the seed fell into the field of thorns, although it sprouted, however, because the thorns had choked the life out of the plants, therefore, it was not able to bear fruit, and it lost its energy, and eventually it died. And this is what this is talking about. And when he explained what the thorny field was, he said, "He also that received seed among the thorns is he that heareth the word, and the care of this world, and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becometh unfruitful." When we read the Bible, we can truly see that there are many people who live with that thorny field in their hearts. And although they have received the word of this gospel of love and life, and although they have received the great love of Jesus, but as they receive the things that are given to them in this world, and whether it is the basic necessities of life, or following the temptations of the world, or the ambitions, and the authority, and the reasonings of this world, this prevents them from living spiritual life. And although they have received the power of God in their heart, that power is not able to work, and they become people who are filled with carnal desires. And currently we can see many people who live like this. As I have done my ministry, I have met many people who are living spiritual lives as Christians. And although they say that they are Christians, but from the center of their hearts, they have not been able to put themselves down. And constantly they keep trying to raise themselves up in their heart. They try to have power, authority, they try to have reasoning, and although they do have problems and worries as well, but more than anything else, the thing that they have most in their heart is the heart to raise themselves, the heart to reveal themselves. In the end, they themselves become their own masters. And so this Jesus, who has the power of life, He has to be the master of our heart. He has to be the king of our heart. And today, He is the one who is supposed to be leading our lives. However, we cannot just leave our lives into the hands of Jesus. And in the end, we just do what we want, trying to raise ourselves up, trying to reveal ourselves, and trying to edify ourselves. But as long as we are raising ourselves up, it is not I, but we don't realize that it is Satan who is inside of us that is deceiving us to do this. Although they say that they are born-again Christians who do have the power of faith, but as long as they are believing in themselves, they cannot understand how that they are within the world of Satan deceiving them. And therefore today, and so these thorns, we have to think about all of these thorns that are inside of our hearts. And as they are growing inside of our hearts, they are blocking the plants from growing in our heart. And in the end, they prevent these plants from producing fruit. And these thorns are handicapping us. And although there are many things that they do, although there are many causes of this, but the biggest cause is trying to exalt and edify ourselves. And living a life of allowing me to be my own master. And therefore, inside of us, although there is the word of the Lord that is life, but we cannot bear any fruit. And in the end result is, there is no fruit of life that appears within us. And this image we can see very clearly. If we were to take one person among all the people in the Bible that we can say can represent this kind of field, who would you choose? Yes, Abraham's nephew, Lot. I want to talk about him. Lot left Abraham as he saw the valley of Jordan, and his possessions, and his things, and his shepherds. And because he had his own possessions, it resulted in him not being able to live with Abraham. You know, this Abraham, who had received the blessing of God, he could not stay with Abraham, and he departed from him. And when he looked at the valleys of Jordan, he felt as if he could receive something from this world, and he thought that he could receive some kind of happiness through this land. And so in the end, he traveled through the valley of Jordan, and near that valley, he ended up going into the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And there, and he followed the things of his flesh. And he had mixed himself with the things of the world. And this unfortunate life is how he began to live. And Lot's wife was filled with material desires. And they had lived committing all these evil things, and their hearts had fallen into them. And her heart had even fallen into jewelry. And in the end result, when God judged the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and although He told Lot and his family not to look back at the city, but in the end result, Lot's wife, who was filled with the material desires, she turned around and looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And the two daughters of Lot, and they married and lived with two men in Sodom and Gomorrah who did not believe in God. And these two men became Lot's sons-in-law. And as this happened, and Lot became drenched with the things of this world. This is recorded in 2 Peter, and we will quickly look at the second book of Peter. And it is written in this manner: "In turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah into ashes, condemn them with an overthrow, making them an example that those after should live godly." So I want to talk to you about Lot's heart, which is like the thorny field. And it says here, he delivered just Lot, vexed with the filthy conversations of the wicked. So in the end, Lot was soaked with the world, and all those filthy things in his heart. And as his heart was drenched with the filthy things of the flesh, and that's why it says that Lot was vexed with the filthy conversations of the wicked. And therefore, through the story of Lot, so we can see that the image of Lot's heart was like this thorny field in which life could not be born. And then there is the field that Jesus talked about, which is the good field. And so this good field bring forth 30-fold, 60-fold, and even 100-fold of fruit through God. And this is what it says. And up until now, as we have seen the words in Matthew chapter 13, and through the parable that Jesus is speaking right now, it says, and the seeds fell among the good ground, and it says they fell among the good ground, and it brought forth fruit 30-fold, 60-fold, and 100-fold. Spreading it on the good ground is representing that the person is accepting the Word of God exactly as it is. As we accept the Word of God as it is, we are able to bring forth fruit. And as we talked about earlier, Philip is the field by the roadside. Although he listened to the words of Jesus, the birds came, and Satan came, and he took away all the words that entered his heart. But Andrew, he received the heart of Jesus exactly as it was, and when he brought forth the loaves and 2 fish from the young man's lunchbox. But there are many stories of people like this who are in the Bible. In the Bible, it talks about the widow of Zarephath, who received Elisha's words exactly as it was, and even in the midst of the famine, she gave to him the last meal that was within her barrel, and the oil that was in the cruse. And when she brought this to Elisha, and when she received his words just as he said them, and God had revealed his power unto her, and when the servants at the wedding feast of Cana was told to do whatever Jesus said to him, and when he said, draw it now and give it to the guests, the water had changed into wine. And then the power of Jesus was revealed. And through Andrew, so the great work of this small meal being changed into enough food to feed more than 5,000 people and even take 12 baskets full of leftovers, it is not just 30-fold or 60-fold or 100-fold, but it became 1,000-fold. It became 5,000-fold. And so we can see that this power had come out. And therefore today in our hearts, we are like the fields by the roadside, or the stony field, or the field with thorns, which are the hearts that represent the fields in which God cannot reveal His power. But here in the Word it talks about the good field. So this good field, everyone, how could it be formed? You know, when we walk down the road, we can see the fields that are possessed by an owner. There are the fields that are taken care of and tilled by the owner, but there are also fields that have been forsaken by the master's hand. But the fields that have been abandoned, they are filled with thorns and weeds and also garbage, and there are stones piled everywhere. But the field that has the master's hand, truly well organized, and the seeds are spread out, and according to this, the sprouts come out, and then the leaves come out, and then later on, it bears forth fruit, and later on, it brings forth fruit. And in the same way, in the world of our hearts, because we already, through the original sin of Adam, we have many problems in our heart because we had followed the prince of the power of the air for so long. And because we had listened to the spirit that works in the sons of disobedience, and we have lived following the desires that come from our flesh, and we are like the fields by the wayside, which many worlds of man have passed through, and the experience of man, and we are filled with the things of this world. And we can reflect upon the world of our hearts today that is inside of our flesh. And also, this heart that falls during the tribulation and persecutions that come due to the Word of God are just like the thorny field. And just like this thorny field, we fall into temptation of sin. And as there are many things of this world that come to us, they are tempted by these things, and they cannot overcome them. And so with the problems of getting their basic necessities, the power, honor over their reasoning, or exalting themselves, and the reasonings of this world, because of all these things that are in this world, and they are like the fields of thorns, which blocks us from having fruit. And I want to talk to you about how the effort of the farmer turns the land into a good field. And through this lecture today, I want to speak to you about this. Everyone, if you look at your hearts, all of our hearts, they are like the stony field, they are like the thorny fields, and they are like the fields by the wayside. And although we have these hearts, but today we have someone who is cultivating our hearts, and he is interfering in our hearts, and he is removing the stones that are in our hearts. And in the same way, this Esther, who was bound by the laws of the palace and could not do anything on her own, Mordecai, through the Word of God, was breaking down the stones that were within her heart. As he removed the stones that were from within her heart, and when he led the world of her heart, so in the end result, able to save the Jews through the Word of God, and so we can see that the precious fruit of God was revealed through her. Today in our spiritual lives is not depending upon us, but we have the one who is cultivating our hearts. But when there is no one who is cultivating the land, and just as a land that is thrown away, this land cannot do any works. So a truly good field is the field that the farmer cultivates with his own hands. If there is road, that hardened road, he breaks down that road with a plow. He makes the soil soft. And if he sees thorns gathering around, he gathers them together and plucks them. And if he sees the weeds as well, And during that time, and only when it is cultivated, that is when the field is made good. And we can see that when this happens, the Word of God can produce power in our hearts. This cultivator is Jesus Christ. And also the cultivator is the Word of God. And also the person who leads us in the church, he can also become our cultivator. Although we say that we are living a spiritual life, but we have never broken the world of our heart, if we have never failed or fallen, if we have never flipped our heart inside out, there are people who have not done this. Even though we are people who have something precious in our heart, and we can see that the works of life will never arise, and we can see that this image exists. Everyone, inside of all of your hearts, you hear many of the words of God. You hear many of the words of God, and also through the Word. Although we try to live a spiritual life of faith, but this cultivator who is able to lead our hearts, it is only done through this cultivator's effort. At times when we live our spiritual lives, we do go through tribulations and we do go through hardships. And sometimes God makes us fail in life, and sometimes He allows us to go through accidents, and He also allows our children to have problems. And therefore, through these various different things, through these different things within our hearts, I realize that, in my heart, I'm not the master. And God, He is the master, and He wants to lead us. And then we can clearly see that this world of the heart exists. And so the good land represents the heart that is changed through the Word of God, and through the Word of God they're able to bring forth fruit. And tonight God has become our King. And so Jesus has become our sincere Lord, and He has become our husband, and He is able to lead our lives. And then so we are able to now lay our hearts down exactly as they are. And for this condition is what we are discussing right now. And therefore today the field of our hearts that is created through the efforts of the cultivator. There are so many people who do have the diligence, and they are very loyal and sincere to God. And there are many people who sacrifice themselves. And although they live these precious lives before the gospel, but because the world of their hearts in no way has ever broken down, their hearts are like stones, and their hearts are like thorns. At times there are the footprints of man all over the field by the roadside. And we can see that they have the image of a person who cannot live boldly before God. And even regarding the good field, there are many people who represent the good field in the Bible. So if you were to choose one person among all the people in the Bible who represent this good field, we are able to speak about Ruth, who was a Moabitess. So this Moabitess, Ruth, she was able to travel with Naomi, her mother-in-law. So this Moabite woman, this Gentile woman. So the Moabites have all been cursed by God. So they had already been rejected by God. They have already been despised by God. Mother-in-law to this land where they curse and despise the people who are from Moab. And so the Israelites were also strict about keeping their people as one, because they were the chosen ones. So when she had returned to the land where David was, the Israelites are very strict about keeping their people as one, because they feel that they are the truly chosen ones. And although they possessed every aspect to be despised, and therefore Ruth was able to say to her mother-in-law, if I am to receive the grace, to glean into whom field I may go. And so this Ruth, there were no thoughts that had risen from within himself. And so these people here are my people. So the God of my mother has become my God. So therefore I do not exist. I am gone. And therefore my thoughts, they no longer have any merit. So then she was able to lower her heart and follow Naomi. So in regarding spiritual life, this heart is the heart that represents the good field. And this is being cultivated. And so Ruth received the words of her mother-in-law Naomi exactly as they were. And she overcame her thoughts. Ruth had gone to the place where Boaz was lying. And because she was a woman, and although she had the heart that this is truly something difficult to do for me, however, as she received the words of her mother-in-law Naomi exactly as they were, and through the works of her uncovering Boaz's feet, she was able to receive the amazing blessings and work of God. And in the end, through Boaz, she was able to have Obed. And so we can see that she was able to receive this great work of God during that time. And so for this lecture, we have talked about the 4 different types of fields. And so the next time, I will be waiting for you. And so we will finish the lecture here. Thank you.